I'm Charles Cinert. I've been with the CAIO Circle for a little over a year now, in helping out, kind of bringing a little bit more of an operational perspective. My career has taken me from companies like Dell to Philips to Sabre, and now I currently lead digital services delivery for Xerox.
Excellent. Mahesh.
I am Mahesh Salem. I'm one of the founding members of the CAIO Circle. I have over 25 years of experience in data analytics, and my first 16 years of my career has been with Big Four, Deloitte, Capgemini, and Young, working with a variety of industries, life sciences, healthcare, retail, public sector, and all of it has been with data analytics. And my expertise is transforming low maturity data environments into governed AI-ready data platforms for insight.
Impressive. My name is Stefan Boehmer. I'm also a founding member of the CIO Circle. I believe I'm the only CFO in that circle, bringing the business background. I have worked for 25 years for Siemens. I have done digital transformations. I have worked with RPA, with AI solutions, and currently I help small companies to scale and to relocate to Texas. So back to our topic. What is black data?
Yeah, I can take the first pass. I work a lot with it. As we start to think about dark data, that's not the readily available data that you would have, right? That's written. It's things like video, things like PDF embedded, other things like that we typically just store somewhere, right? We've stored for years, out on a SharePoint, or if you're using the cloud, maybe up in Glacier or something to that effect as you start to think about it. But it's actually the most rich data that you can get because it's a lot of contextual data.
For me, there's a difference between black data and dark data. So the current LLMs cover everything what is readily available and some things which are not readily available. Dark data is well defined. Dark data is the data which is available but not accessible. So talking about company data, talking about PDFs, old emails. Black data is not as well defined, but for black data, I also look at tribal knowledge, internal knowledge, which is not recorded on any paper, PDF, which is even much more difficult to access.
Yeah, I like that, Stefan. I like the kind of the cross you have, because I think most people talk about dark data versus kind of the black data. I think that bifurcation actually is very meaningful, as you were saying that.
And you see that when you implement AI solutions, for me, AI is a tool. You improve the process, and very often you skip the part of the tribal knowledge. What do people know? What is not well documented? And these are the gaps you see later in the process that causes errors or malfunctions.
Yeah, I was just at sorry, Mahesh.
No, I was going to say, to me, dark data is the information that organizations create and collect and store, but don't make use of it. And I like the black data nuance, but most of the time, dark data is semi-structured or unstructured data. And because of that, it is both an opportunity and at the same time a liability. So every organization is sitting on data landfill and gold mine, and it's the same file.
So how can organizations leverage that, Mahesh?
So there is a couple of steps that we can take. The first one is to identify what is dark data, what data is available and stored and not being used. And the first step is to then classify it. So one of the classifications is whether it is black data or dark data, and where it is stored. What is the retention policy? Usually these are accumulating because there is no good retention policy. And basically it is a symptom and a result of poor governance. And at the same time, it is making that governance weaker because now you have more and more data. And once you classify that information, then you can prioritize which of the data sets that you have and then apply the right use cases. And we can get more into some of those examples today as we talk. And then once we have that part done, then we can use whether it is RAG or LLM or other data science tools and techniques to then gain insights and value out of it.
That makes sense for me. I'd like to bring one example to get it a clear understanding. In the past, a help desk might have recorded calls on Excel, on Word, if lucky on PDF, and that was stored somewhere. Personal drives, corporate drives, or simply on the desk. And then you also have the tribal knowledge that people know how to respond because they have solved the issues, but it's not documented well. So for me, that's a prime example of dark data, which you have to access to enable your LLM to learn faster and respond.
Yeah, I think the context is interesting. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago speaking about really this, and it was more in the context of workflows, but it was for the nuclear power sector. And we were talking about how nuclear reactors are licensed for 40 years. And then right now there's 2 20-year sequential adds to that. And record keeping, data keeping in that business is significant. They may have to go back to a request for 20 years ago and said, hey, Mahesh took what training, exactly what document, exactly what happened, and so on and so forth. And as we started talking about the context of the longevity of a career, which is typically 35 years, right, if you're lucky, right, in that context, how does that contextual data pass with it as it goes along? And I think that, part of it is going to have to be some of these measures where not only do you reach out into the dark data, but the black data, as you were talking about, and get that into the concepts of the system in order to do it. But I think the other part that we'll have to think about, and I think, Mahesh, you were right, is, the truth is storing all of this data, keeping all this data in the promise of tomorrow actually opens up a surface, an attack plane, right? If you ever do have a breach, given the fact that these models are moving so rapidly, and at least in, the United States, the government gets a 30-day reprieve prior to any issuance of a model that's coming out. And so I think it's a unique balance. I'd like to understand what you guys think about, like, how do I keep the data? How do I not keep the data? What's valuable? What's not valuable? What do I pursue and what don't I pursue?
You brought up a very important point about data, dark data being a liability also, apart from being an opportunity. So dark data is piling up because storage is cheaper, and most of the organizations, we keep producing data, and then we don't do anything about it, probably because, like I mentioned, poor governance, lack of retention policies or enforcement of those retention policies. And it's also because there is no specific business case that they have in mind. And when there is no business case, then that data is untouched and it just keeps piling on. And because of and when no one owns the use case, or when everyone owns the data, then no one does anything about it. So it's important to come up with very specific use cases. And then when it comes to, and we can talk about how to go about prioritizing a use case and then what steps to take as we continue on this chat. But I want to talk more about the liability part of it. Especially, Charles, you mentioned in a nuclear facility, what that means. But also in, say, healthcare, when we talk about GDPR compliance, CCPA, or HIPAA compliance, there is dark data is where the compliance landmine is. When there is a request for deletion of personal data, you cannot be compliant with it unless you already know where that unstructured data or personal information is there in a recording that the company is not aware of. So it becomes important that the dark data is mapped, classified, and then the right retention policy is also applied so that we are compliant with the regulatory requirements, especially in healthcare or some of these sensitive industries.
You're right. I believe regulated industries are one step ahead. Other industries have a big challenge in front of them. Retention policies are normally applied very well to paper, not so well to digital data. And if you look at data in industries, in companies, it's rarely that you find historical data for the past 20 years or something, you find some years. Because depending on the employee, some records were stored, some records were lost or never stored. So you don't have consistent data, which is even worse. And I would always recommend start with your record retention policy and define how many years of records you want, because it doesn't make sense to have maintenance records from 25 years ago.
Yeah. And I think the interesting part is I was reading a Gartner article recently, and they were looking at the cost of, let's say, an incident, right, on this data. And what they're seeing now is in comparison to what we would call a normal incident from cybersecurity, which has a data breach or a data lockup, right, from that perspective, that AI influence, AI impacted type of data, this type of stuff, it's about 2.5 times more expensive to unwind one of those than what we've seen in the past. And so the cost of unwinding something, even potentially mitigating something, continues to go up in this environment that we're in today, specifically around these type of datas.
When we talk about the opportunity and how we can leverage dark data, one of the things that we need to also address as part of governance is come up with the retention policy and delete some of the data that can be a liability. So that's also an important step of what to do with dark data.
Yes, and then you need to develop use cases and decide what you want to do with it, if there's a benefit. I mean, if you have maintenance records for equipment on the shop floor, it makes sense to leverage that knowledge to define predictive maintenance, preventive maintenance. There are things you can do, but it needs to be use case based. Not all data needs to be somehow used for unknown purposes.
Yeah.
Some of examples of what we can delete are, say, duplicate backups.
Yes.
Or obsolete logs of previous systems or applications. So these are definitely data that can be deleted in line with the retention policy. And that also makes the models that we're going to talk about more accurate, and it also reduces liability and storage costs, though the storage costs are not a significant factor nowadays.
Yep.
Yeah, but I would say there's, just thinking out loud, there's probably another side. When I was working in healthcare, I worked with a major university cardiology provider, and they had found a server that had been running in some room for like 10 years that nobody remembered, knew anything about collecting cath lab data. And, on the other side, as you start to think through and cull through your data from that perspective, it's also to understand your data. I think, Mahesh, you said, hey, it's categorizing it right from that perspective, because what they found with that data, which they didn't know existed, it became a wealth of knowledge for population health type of activities. And so, part of what companies need to think about, part of what data managers, AI managers need to think about is not just kind of culling, but keeping, right? I think there's a separate value in both of those categories.
It's easy if you understand your data. I mean, we had screened our storage and we found data which wasn't touched in many, many years. And then the question really is, does it make sense? If you find gold mines like you just described, I mean, that opens other doors, other opportunities, but I believe that's more rare. I think finding a server is already, extreme.
And the proprietary internal data in and which is part of the dark data, is exactly what differentiates the model of one company with its competitor.
Correct.
So if we are able to harness all the insights from dark data, which is proprietary internal, and it is usually in semi-structured and unstructured data like we talked about, that would be a major differentiator.
How can you harvest this?
So we can come up, talk about maybe some examples. So in general, most of these insights of typical business intelligence or reporting are siloed. For example, if there is a customer who is complaining that a particular product that has been shipped is not working the way it is supposed to, then it's handled like a customer complaint, and then there's a refund, discount, replacement, whatever you have. But when you have dark data that is now classified, and then there's a use case, and then if you have if you apply RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and then connect the dots between the manufacturing logs and the specific supplier of parts that went into that particular component, then you can link the conditions in which it was manufactured, and if that is specific to a particular supplier part, and a combination of the manufacturing conditions, and then connect that to the customer experience, then it can uncover significant insights in terms of whether a supplier part is causing it, is it a particular batch, is it a specific manufacturing facility or load conditions that is causing it. And then you can, apart from the replacement, discount, whatever you do to address the specific customer complaint, you can find other batches where this could be a problem and potentially send replacements beforehand, and also change the manufacturing practices or talk to the supplier to fix that. And that is a big value opportunity instead of just applying reporting or insights in terms of what the customer complaints are about. And I can talk about more examples. I'm sure you also have many.
I mean, examples make sense because it explains it very practical. So I understand every company has black data. Who is responsible for managing it, for accessing it, for deciding?
So, end of the day, I think business owns the data, but this requires a collaboration between both the business and also the data team, which could be IT team or data team specific to that particular business unit, and then be able to classify that information. The data retention policy is overall for the company, so that's more of a overall organizational policy. But applying those, and once you classify that, then you come up with the business use cases of what data is available after you have classified and what use cases can be applied. And that's where the collaboration is needed in terms of now what is possible with RAG, LLM, or other data science techniques that are available. And that's a discussion between both business and the data science team. And then setting up the right data platform if it is not there, and then making that data available to data science, and then connecting the dots to gain the insights.
I mean, for me, AI is 95% business. So I see the business unit and the lead, and the data scientists, IT is the enabler. So you also need to ensure it's used the same way company-wide, retention policies and so on. But I clearly see the business in the lead, which makes sense because they have the P&L responsibility and they need to invest in the future.
Well, I think it's also interesting. I work a lot with medium businesses, so not large enterprise businesses who may be able to afford all the structure that we just, talked about, right? Sometimes the business doesn't know how to own the data, right? From that perspective, they can't. And so I think that there's a couple things to think about in those type of contexts, right? Is one, somebody, to your point, a business person needs to understand how to value the data. Otherwise, I think, an IT type of person will step in, right? And will have more of a propensity to lock things down because they focus on security and other stuff, not knowing the business in that context. I think utilizing potentially third parties to help out with that may have the experience in helping you get through this journey starts to become very important. Vetting out ones who really, really understand how to make those connections at the size of the business. So, all the stuff that we're sharing, I think shouldn't scare off a smaller business as an example versus an enterprise business. On the enterprise, it can be more structure, more effectiveness. It's really kind of more velocity, I think, on the enterprise side, right? How do you get through all of these conjoining tissues? On the small, medium business side, let's call it sub-enterprise side, from that perspective, it's really getting an education of what it is because they never really had to have it before in the most part, and then finding the right resources to create such a flow or a velocity that we were talking about just a couple moments ago.
That makes sense. I mean, for me, in smaller units, it's a C-suite responsibility. They need to drive it. Otherwise, it will not be applied through the company.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of senior folks in different companies, and what we're starting to find is that there starting to be this mentality where, AI is good, but the truth is my competitor has AI. And my competitor's not slowing down in what they're trying to do. And they may not get it right. Maybe they're 70% right. But if we're not moving forward at some level of clip, are you already falling behind? Not just in the context of moving data around and the rest of that, but as it starts to augment some of the mundane processes, these type of things like that free up human capital, free up assets to go do other things. And it could be mining dark data. It could be doing some of these other things that actually help them catapult forward. That, C-suite has to own it, right, at a certain point to set the direction and tone across all of it, including dark data from that perspective.
We just wanted to provide one more example that's more for across small, medium, and large enterprises would be, say, contracts. So most of the time there are contracts, but the invoices may not be in line with the contract. Some discount is not applied, or there could be duplicate invoices and things like that. These are just some examples I just wanted to add while you're talking about for small, medium, or any large enterprises.
Can I throw something out there? Because you brought up contracts, was interesting because this has been something here recently that's top of mind for me and a group of people who think about this. We also look at kind of dark data, maybe in a little bit of expansion of the definition of it. When we start to think about contracts, we really take kind of a white hat, black hat approach to it, right? We all say, hey, here's my corporate contract, and I believe that the contract is sound because I've had a legal department or somebody, right, who has that expertise look at it. And I would call that the kind of the white hat scenario. We look at the dark data side, where we come and challenge it as somebody who would challenge that. Where are the faults within that contract? Where are the things that potentially we need to do better for our customers in describing maybe SLAs or other things like that? Or even, heaven forbid, we get into a contentious position. How does that work? And thinking about the data that's not written, but written in a contract, if that makes sense. What are your thoughts?
I mean, that's more important for smaller, mid-sized companies because there's less focus on the contract side. I talk with companies where they say they only use legal for extreme, challenging or important contracts. Otherwise, it's reviewed internally, and there you have the risk. And especially if you work with on a relationship base and say, I know the supplier, I know the customer well, we have worked together for 10 years or whatever, so you clearly have the risk.
Yeah.
Hey, another example comes to mind, which is a slightly different use case, which is about sales calls. And typically when the deals don't come through, then there's usually one or two specific categories or a couple of categories as to why the deal did not go through. But the actual reasons are usually in the conversations that happen. And if you have the recordings of those, then using AI, you can now quantify, apart from classify, you can also quantify what percentage was because of budget issues, what percentage of it is because competition has a particular feature or something else like that. So it's not just the specific reasons, but also you can use it to classify and get more insights based on those conversations. That's just in the release.
That goes one step further. I worked with one company and they recorded the sales calls and used it for training of the sales employees. Yeah. Because you can summarize with AI, you can highlight good approaches with room for improvement, and you really can train your employees how to tackle that going forward, what to avoid, what to say. So there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I would even add some companies are using it for the upfront stuff, the BDRs and the SDRs on the qualified side, but not that to actually create agentic or co-working capabilities to harvest some of the Metapic, right? That type of information spice that's coming out of there to be able to help quantify or qualify the customer. So there is extended value as you think about it in the workflow.
All right, coming back to our topic, black, dark data. Is there anything we didn't touch on? We talked about the upsides, the downsides, the risks. We talked about how we can leverage it. We talked about who should own it, who should drive it. Did we neglect any other relevant topic?
Do you want to kind of summarize what the best practices would be?
Yeah, do you want to go ahead, Mahesh?
Yeah, so the first thing would be to inventory and classify what you have. So if you can't govern or monetize, if you have not mapped it, then the next part would be to set retention and deletion policies and delete the data to reduce liability. And then with whatever is retained, then you strengthen your governance and security before you turn AI on that particular data sets. Then you prioritize based on use cases where you work closely. We talked about business owning those use cases and data science or data team collaborating to enable those. And then once we have the model, then you monitor the data quality to make sure that the insights are trustworthy. And then you kind of go through the loop again.
Excellent. Great summary. Thank you, Mahesh. If the audience has questions, they can reach out to the CIO Circle or to Charles, Mahesh, or myself. You can find us on LinkedIn, and please don't hesitate. Thank you very much, Mahesh. Charles, I really enjoyed the discussion, and yeah, thank you.
My pleasure, team. Look forward to continuing.